Once again, welcome everybody. At the end of a long but very, very dense day we had today, I think with many, many interesting, very interesting presentations. And this is going to be the conclusion of all the good presentations we had today. I'm introducing Paul Wagner. Being German, I allow myself to pronounce it correctly, Wagner and not Wagner. We are staying in the US with him, of course. Paul just told me that his family originally came from Ulm. This is the region where I come from too. Another part in Banat, in nowadays Romania. He is a marketing specialist, well known in the industry along the world. He has been an instructor for Napa Valley's College's Viticulture and Winery Technology Department for more than 25 years. He's also a guest lecturer at many universities, including the Winter MBA program in Europe, OIV Wine Marketing Masterclass at UC Davis and the Culinary Institute of America. He has spoken at more than 80 conferences. They are writing that. I think it's true. 81 throughout the world on wine tourism, wine education, public affairs, and wine marketing. And Paul is going to explain us a little bit about the US market, how it works, and what you have to do if you want to succeed there. The stage is yours.
Thank you. Good evening. You're still awake? Yes? Okay, I'll try to honor that. And let's see if I can make this computer work. Good. So, how many of you have taken a marketing class? Good. Who can give me a definition of marketing? Let me ask the question again. How many of you have taken a marketing class? What's marketing? Isn't it amazing? You can study a subject for 6 months, for 2 years, maybe even have a master's or a doctorate in marketing, and you can't tell people what it is. This is the... Okay, anything you do to support the sale of your product. That is a great definition from the point of view of a salesperson. And to illustrate what a great definition that is, on a Saturday morning, you're at home, the doorbell rings, 2 little girls come up dressed in green. They're selling Girl Scout cookies. The question is not if you're going to buy the cookies. The question is, how many boxes are you going to buy? Because the Girl Scouts have great marketing. An hour later, 2 young gentlemen, very skinny black ties, Bibles under their arm. They ring the doorbell. You look out. You don't open the door. Because Jehovah's Witnesses have terrible marketing. So in one way, a great definition of marketing is preparing the ground for sales. And it really involves everything. If we think of your company as a vineyard, sales is picking the grapes. Everything you do before that, what land to buy, what grapes to plant, the trellis system, the pruning system, biodynamic, organic, whatever it is, all of that is marketing. Sales is picking the grapes. So a few years ago, I asked this question in my class, and a man in the back, about my age, raised his hand and he says, I have a definition. He said, marketing is finding a need in the market and then filling it. I said, that's a great definition. But it's such a good definition, I have to ask, what is your background? He said, I was a vice president of marketing for Procter & Gamble for 12 years. I said, why are you in my class? He said, I'm learning about selling wine. I said, you're going to be very depressed. No, it's not the same. If this is the definition of marketing, finding a need in the market and then creating a product for that need, how many of you have wineries that are managed this way. No, it's not the way the wine industry works. The wine industry says, in my region, we grow this. The wine industry says, it's my winery, we make this. And then we expect people to buy it because we love it. Bad marketing. And the marketing starts with what we decide to make, where we decide to make it, all of the decisions we make before we pick the grapes. So let's take a look at the US market, what they want, because that will help you decide whether or not that's a market you want to sell to. It is the largest wine market in the world. And the top 5 countries consume almost half of the world's consumption, but the United States, in fact, consumes more than 10% of the world's consumption of wine, and at a higher price than almost any other market. So if you want to be in a market, that's the market you want to be in. Now we'll talk about the problems. But wine revenue, it's a $72 billion market in the US. And about 75%, 65 to 75% is domestically produced, and we import between 25 and 30% depending on harvest totals and other things. So what are we drinking? Because you think, wow, the biggest wine market in the world, wine must be really important in the United States. Well, I want you to look at this chart, and I want you to try to find wine. Whoops, here. See the big purple line at the top? That's not wine. See the green one? That's not wine. Then the pink one? That's not wine. Then the blue one? That's not wine. See the tiny little pink wine along the bottom? That's wine in America. We drink more soft drinks, bottled water, coffee, milk, beer, tea, juice, powdered drinks than we drink wine. So even though we are the largest wine market in the world, wine is a tiny percentage of our total beverage market. And it's not really changing much. Our per capita consumption is not going up very much. Our population is growing. But in general, wine has a few years ago started to flatten out. It's still pretty flat. We are drinking better wine, more expensive wine, but we're not drinking more wine. And the one category in this that is clearly going down is beer. And something that I think should give us all something to think about is that the growing category of alcoholic beverages in America is spirits. And it's spirits because spirits have created an image of unique handcrafted products. Now, for some reason, millennials don't think of wine as a unique handcrafted product, but they think tequila is. So somewhere in our messaging, we are doing something terribly wrong. In terms of what we drink Chardonnay and Cabernet. Red blends at a much lower price point. And this is simple to explain. When I was young, there were 2 drinks. When I was in school, there were 2 drinks. You must know what they are. Turn on any sports event. Coke and Pepsi, all right? My generation has grown up thinking there are 2 drinks, Chardonnay, Cabernet. Okay? We don't like to have many choices. My generation, keep things simple, Chardonnay, Cabernet, Coke, Pepsi, it's easy. My children's generation is very different, and we'll talk about them in a minute. Pinot Gris growing thanks primarily to the massive and successful marketing of Santa Margarita in the States. How is that changing? Here you can see Chardonnay down a little bit. Red blends are growing. Red blends because some of the biggest companies in the world are investing in the idea that we can make a wine that has no appellation, no vintage, no varietal composition. We can sell it for $25 to $35 a bottle, and our hands are completely free in how we make this wine. We don't need to meet any regional regulations. We don't need to obey any labeling laws because it's California red wine, $28 a bottle, and we can put anything we want in it. That's why that category is growing. And I'm hoping I'm going to fly through this presentation because I'm expecting lots of questions. But if anyone would like to just throw up their hand and say, stop, I'll stop. And we can ask a question. How much does it cost? Notice the trends. Anything under $10 a bottle, the trend over the last few years has been down, 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 down. And anything over $10 a bottle, the trend is up, up, up. So if you're selling wine in America, raise the price. Simple and easy. So what do Americans like to drink? The number one characteristic of the wines that people look for when they type in on the internet, I am looking for a wine that is, the number one word is smooth. Now, I find this fascinating because if you ask a sommelier, what does this wine taste like? The sommelier will give you 25 descriptors of the aroma. No? Delicate nuances, rose petals, a little bit of cinnamon. Yes, I get a little bit of polished barley and some delicate French oak and blah, 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 blah. What does the consumer want to know? Is it smooth? So consumers are talking here, sommeliers are talking here, and consumers are drinking here. Something we have to change in this business. Smooth, fruity. Interestingly enough, Americans will tell you they drink dry, but all of those red blends are sweet enough that if you were to release them in another country, they would have residual sugar in them, including the vast majority of Chardonnay made in America is sweet. Not 2% sweet, but 0.6, 0.7, 0.8 sugar. Yep, absolutely. So here's our per capita consumption. You can see it has been growing, but it's stopping. And it's mainly stopping. We'll get into the demographics. People my age are dying, and young people aren't drinking more wine. It's a problem. But the value is up. And here you can see for every year except the tremendous recession year of 2009, every single year, the average price per bottle in the United States has gone up. In 2018, it was 5.2%. 2019, 2020, 2021, they're all up. So the problem is we are not one country. We are 50 loosely affiliated states. I'm sure if you follow our politics, you can see this. But we are also different because consumers are very different. So let's talk about consumers. Only 50% of Americans drink wine. And of those 50%, only 25 drink wine on a regular basis. The rest of Americans don't drink wine. More women than men. Partly because wine is seen as a slightly more civilized beverage, and women tend to be slightly more civilized than men. But also because women, despite all the work we do to change gender roles, women still do most of the shopping, so they still buy most of the wine. But you can see below on the right, wine drinkers by age. Notice boomers, 34%, millennials, 34%, but Gen Z and Gen Xers are much less than that, and millennials are not drinking wine as fast as boomers did. So the market is beginning to fade because young people are not buying wine. And why? They find it hard to select a wine. When someone comes into a wine shop and wants help, what is the first thing we tell them? You should take a class to learn more about wine. When someone goes on iTunes to buy music, nobody from Apple says you should take a class to learn more about music. But that's what we tell them about wine. And so instead, they go to a bar where there's a nice bartender who says, I'm going to make you something special just for you. A little tequila, a little rose water, a little this, a little that, just for you. And they're drinking cocktails. So here you can see, in terms of quantity of wine consumed, people my age, the baby boomers, are still by far the biggest cohort. Sorry. So who buys the good wine? Well, here you can see boomers are orange. All of the good wine is being bought by boomers. My parents' generation, they're dead. They don't buy wine. Gen Xers, millennials, far less wine than boomers. So as we look down the future, if you are making a 10-year, 20-year, 30-year business plan in terms of wine in America, you need to be concerned because the young people are not drinking what my generation drank. And interestingly enough, in 2019, it was the first year that young women drank more wine than young men. So wine is even more a drink for women. This is just a little interesting. What do people care about? I know in Europe there is great interest in the Green Party, in biodynamics, in sustainable agriculture. That is much less true in the States. People do speak about that. They say, yes, that's interesting. The challenge is they don't like to pay 10 cents more to get it. So if you can put that on the bottle and your price is the same as your competitor, great. But if you say, my wine is organic and it's $1 more, it will be difficult to sell the bottle unless you have additional marketing. Here's the real problem. The US market is saturated. About 140 to 150,000 labels every year are sold in the US market. And here's the problem. How many of you work for a winery? How many of you think about quality when you make your wines? Of course. The problem is, so does everybody else. And so when you look at I make good wine as being a distinguishing characteristic of your brand, the truth is it's not. Everybody makes good wine these days. And I will show you the next slide, which will convince you even more. These are the top 100 wines from the Wine Spectator a couple years ago. Every single wine was 98 points or higher. So you make good wines. If you're not getting 98, 99, or 100 points, you're not making good wine. And the 63rd wine of the 100 top wines still got 100 points. So if you don't get a 100-point wine, there are at least 63 wines ahead of you in terms of quality. You cannot talk about quality because everybody has quality. So you need to find something else to talk about. And here's the other problem. This is the number of wineries in the US. So the competition keeps growing. Not only is the quality level very high, but also the competition continues to grow. And in some regions like Oregon, look at this. The number of wineries in Oregon has just exploded. So where do we make wine in the United States? Does anyone know what percentage of wine in the United States comes from California? 75%? 90%? You guys are in the industry. That's not fair. Yeah. It's actually about 80, close to 75, about 80. Yeah. What percentage is made in the Napa Valley where I come from? 3%. We are not famous for making a lot of wine. We're famous for making very good and very expensive wine. So really, when we're talking about the American wine industry, with a couple of small exceptions, we're talking about California as producing. But there are now wineries in all 50 states. And I have had decent Muscat from Oklahoma. I have had decent Cabernet Franc from Kentucky. I've had good Riesling from Michigan. You would be amazed at where we are making wine these days. So, we're not one market. We're men, we're women, we're millennials, we're boomers, but we're also not one market in that we are distributors, retailers, restaurateurs, chain buyers, the famous three-tier system. If you ever wanted to see how the United States is a loose federation of 50 states, alcohol is where that is most obvious. Because of the repeal of prohibition, where for 18 years we made alcohol illegal, when we repealed prohibition, we gave every state the right to regulate alcohol in that state. And it's why selling wine, selling beer, selling spirits in the United States is a logistical and legal nightmare. But consumers are not one market. Let's start with the trade. We have distribution, on-premise, off-premise, and the fastest growing segment of the market in the US is, in fact, DTC, direct to consumer. You may know these names, but the biggest distribution companies in the world are in the United States, and they are consolidating. What I think is wonderful about this chart is there are 5 companies here on this chart. This chart is from 6 years ago. There are now 3 companies because 2 sets of these companies have merged. So imagine that the 2 largest distributors in California, the largest market in the US, each have between 15 and 20,000 references in their catalog. One salesman, 15,000 references. So you can imagine how much attention your wine is going to get. Here's another way of illustrating this. On the right, in 1995, there were 2,000 wineries and 3,000 distributors in the United States. Today, there are 10,000 wineries and fewer than 1,000 distributors in 2022. So the equation has completely changed around, and the biggest challenge is not getting consumers to buy your wine. The biggest challenge is getting your wine in front of consumers. This is the bottleneck. And to give you an idea of why, here is who has leverage in the US market. And this statistic comes from a few years ago. Gallo has consequently purchased a number of brands from Constellation. The Wine Group has purchased a number of brands from Constellation. So in fact, between Gallo and the Wine Group, now they are almost 50% of the entire market. So yeah, times are tough. If anyone wants to leave now, I will understand. So, let's talk about wine by channel. Many years ago, this was somewhat different, but today, and particularly after COVID, the on-premise is much smaller than the off-premise. About 25% of our wine is sold in restaurants, Oreca, as you call it, and about 75 to 80% is sold retail. So, huge difference between other markets. Yes, there we go. And this continues to rise. Off-premise sales continue to rise because people for 2 reasons, I think. One of them is people continue to see wine as a way to show hospitality in their home. If you invite your boss to dinner, it is much more acceptable to serve a bottle of wine than to hand him or her a beer. But the other reason that off-premise is growing is because in the US, the markup on wines in restaurants is astronomical. normally 3 times or more the wholesale price of the wine. So consumers go into a restaurant and they see a wine they can purchase in the supermarket for $12 or $15, and it's in the restaurant for $45. And as a result, they sell a lot less wine. And this is just over a few years, but it gives you an idea of what's happening in the US market with wine. And this is also complicated by the fact now that millennials, when they go to a restaurant and the waiter comes and says, "What are we drinking tonight?" they don't start with a bottle of Prosecco. They start with, "I'll have a Manhattan. I'll have a margarita. I'll have a daiquiri." And they have a cocktail before dinner, and that means they probably won't drink much wine during dinner. Okay, let's look at the geography. This is a map taken when at least we knew the Americas were there. Which states matter? California is bigger than the next 2 states combined. California, in terms of an economy, is somewhere competitive with Germany. So the 4th or 5th economy in the world, depending on which year and which statistics. And it's growing at about 8 to 10% a year. So it will soon be the 4th largest economy in the world. New York, Florida, also big. New Jersey might surprise you, but remember that New Jersey is across the river from New York. And then there are a few states that always stand out. The per capita consumption in Nevada is always very, very high. This is not because Nevada drinks wine. It's because Las Vegas is in Nevada, and people from New York and Los Angeles and Chicago and San Francisco go to Las Vegas and drink wine. So, yeah. Here's the per capita, and you can see the number one. Does anyone know what the number one wine consuming per capita in the world? It's not Portugal. Yes. The only country better is Vatican City. What else do they have to do? Yeah, Vatican City. And of course, in the States, the highest per capita consumption is Washington, D.C., for the same reason. There's a lot of stress. There's a lot of medication there. But after that, Nevada, small market, very high per capita, and then California again. So let's talk about these consumers. Constellation did some excellent work a few years ago on what they call the genome segments. We talk about geography, where they live. We talk about demography, how old are they, gender, male, female. Now let's talk about psychography, psychographics. How do they think about wine? And Constellation created 6 customer profiles. And there is the image seeker who drinks wine not necessarily because he, and it's almost always a he, not because he likes the flavor, but because he likes what it says about him. You have the everyday loyal who just wants a glass of wine, probably the closest thing to what you have as wine consumers in many parts of Europe. The enthusiast who loves wine, loves to talk about it, loves to ask endless questions, is very boring in restaurants because he won't shut up about wine. And then you have the engaged newcomer who's very excited, price-driven, they like whatever wine is on sale, and the category I always love, the overwhelmed. They look at a wall of wine and they surrender. Too many choices, too much information, sorry, whatever is close. So here's a problem. In the wine industry, we talk to the image seekers and the enthusiasts. Those are the people we want to talk to because those are the people who really know wine. And we completely ignore those other people. And yet those other people also buy a lot of wine and a lot of good wine. These are people who buy a luxury wine, and notice that the enthusiast image seekers all of them at one point or another buy good wine. Now, the overwhelmed person may stand in front of the wall and say, I have no idea. But when their father-in-law is coming for dinner, they will go to the wine shop and say, I have $50. What should I buy? They will buy expensive wine, and we don't talk to those people at all. There is one wine region in the world that talks to those people. Does anyone know who it is? If you had to buy a bottle of wine to celebrate something, what would you buy? Do they talk about how it's made? No. They talk about the fact that when you win the Formula One championship, you celebrate with champagne. They talk about when Prince Rainier married Princess Grace of Monaco, they drank champagne. So when someone wants to buy a bottle for a friend who is celebrating something, they don't want to understand the difference between Veltliner Sonneur and the regular release of J.J. Prum. They don't want to understand the difference between Chateau Lafite Rothschild and Terroir de Lafite. They just want a bottle of champagne. Smart marketing. We do have a whole new generation of consumers in America. My two daughters are millennials. They are fearless. Remember when I was young, there were two drinks, Coke and Pepsi? My children grew up thinking that drinks were a way to explore the world. Because when they ordered a drink, they didn't order a Coke or a Pepsi. They ordered an iced cappuccino from Indonesia, or a frappuccino with extra milk from Colombia. And they learned about beverages from Starbucks. And they think you can explore the world by drinking. And they haven't adopted wine because we have done a lousy job of telling them about wine. They buy a wine called Fat Bastard from France. If I went to my mother's house, Mom, I brought wine. She would look at the label. The bottle wouldn't come in-house. And maybe I wouldn't get dinner either. No, that's not appropriate. My children love this wine. They aren't afraid of screw caps. They think screw caps are great. And really interesting, we tell everyone what food to eat with our wine, and they don't drink wine at dinner. If you go to my daughter's house for a party, she has a table set up. Dim sum, sushi, pizza, nachos, tacos, everything on the table. And on the side of the room, a table full of wine. Now, if I'm a connoisseur, I can walk in and say, oh, a Riesling from the Moselle, perfect with the sushi, with the salmon sushi. But they don't do that. They walk in and they say, pizza, Pinot Noir, going with the P thing. You know? If it doesn't work, they buy something else. They try something else. Nah, that didn't like that one. Give me another one. We tell them they should go to school. When was the last time someone told you to go to school and you thought that was a good idea? So, by the way, my daughter, one of the things I ask my students is give me categories of wine. If I ask the industry, what is a category? They will say red, white, sparkling, still. They will say wines of France, wines of Italy, Burgundy or Bordeaux. They all have to do with where and what. So I asked my students, organize some tastings. One of them came back and said, we did a great tasting. Everybody loved it. Good. I said, what was the category? Wines made by people with connections to Hollywood. I said, really? Yes, they said, Francis Ford Coppola makes much better wine than Gerard Depardieu. Good to know, huh? Yeah. For them, that was a category. Why shouldn't it be for us? If they're the market, we should be thinking along these lines. So, millennials rock. You can see the chart here. Their numbers are going to stay very high. Yes, question?
What do you think they are more interested in about the Indonesian coffee rather than the wine? I mean, what is taking the time to, do the research about the coffee or about the tea or any other,
Yeah.
not the wine on the same way? I mean,
Great question. And in fact, the question is almost perfect. There's only one problem. You mentioned research. They don't do research. They play. They're Mac people, not PC people. What do Mac people do when their computer doesn't do something they want? They start pushing buttons to see what happens. No? When my computer doesn't work, I call tech. Hello, I have a problem. My daughter, oh no, give me that, Dad. My daughter once absolutely deleted all of the photographs from our vacation because she wanted to show me how to delete one photograph. Sorry, Dad. They don't go to Starbucks and research. They go to Starbucks and say, I haven't had Indonesia before. Let's try that one. The same way they were picking the Pinot Noir with the pizza. It's a game. It's fun. So they're not doing research, they're playing. And I think one of the big mistakes we make is we tell them you shouldn't play with wine. You should learn about it. If there's one thing Steve Jobs taught us about computers, when he presents a new product, who explains it? Does he bring out the engineers to explain how the computer functions? No. But when we introduce a new wine, who do we bring out? The winemaker. He wants to tell you the bricks at harvest. He wants to tell you the clone of Gewürztraminer that he used to make the wine. The most recent advertising campaign for the new iPhone, remember, it's a phone. What was the advertising campaign about? What kind of movies you can make when you buy this phone. We should be telling people how much fun you can have with this wine instead of telling them how many barrels, what kind of soil. Well, anyway, I'm starting to get too excited. I'll calm down, I promise. Millennials do spend money. They spend money on experiences, possibly because they'll never afford to buy a house. So yeah, they'll spend it on other things. And interestingly enough, millennials know more about wine than boomers. If you ask people my generation to name wine varietals, most people my age could name 3. Chardonnay, Cabernet, maybe Merlot. Millennials can name 5. So they actually know more, but they're not interested in the same way. And this is why boomers still buy the vast majority of wine. So let's talk about getting into the US market. First of all, for the trade, you need to convince them you're serious about wine. But as we have seen, everybody makes good wine. You need to build relationships. I always tell people that you cannot sell wine to the United States. You can only sell wine in the United States. If you are not going to go to the United States and be a human presence in the market, your wine will not sell. And you need passionate people. There is nothing that makes me laugh harder than to see a winemaker say, I'm very passionate about the wines I make. Don't tell me what you're passionate about. Tell me what you love. I would much rather hear you tell me about how you love skiing or surfing than to tell me you're really passionate about the way you make your wines. So, really let the passion show through. And ultimately, you need a good story. You know what KISS stands for? Keep it simple, stupid. You need a simple message. Let me describe the distribution system in America for you. You are a winery. You sell to an importer. The importer sells to a distributor. The distributor presents to his sales force. The sales force presents to a retailer. The retailer presents to a salesperson who presents to the customer. How much of your story gets through that system? We all played this game as children. I started out saying 3 purple elephants ate a raccoon, and somehow at the end of this story, it's Republicans lost the election, right? It doesn't work. So you need a simple system, you need a memorable story, and we're going to talk about that. And you need to communicate with every person in that system. We're in the age of social media. We're in the age of email, text, WhatsApp. The retail salesperson shouldn't hear the story from the sales manager. He should hear it from you. And every person in that system should hear the story from you. And it should be a story so good that even if they don't like the wine, they want to tell the story. So your job is not only to make good wine, your job is to be memorable. So, how to talk to consumers. We have always, in the wine industry, wished that people would be, in America, would accept more wine as an everyday beverage. Millennials are happy to drink wine, but we're doing everything wrong. Do not teach chemistry. The romance of wine has nothing to do with titratable acidity. Don't teach about denominaciones de origen. Sorry, just tell me a good story. Winemakers care about these things, but as you know, winemakers don't buy wine, right? Acidity, pH balance, sugar at harvest, none of this is interesting. It's not memorable. If you ever watch one of the Charlie Brown, the Peanuts programs on television, remember when the adults talk? They don't say anything. They just say, wah, 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 wah. When winemakers talk about this, consumers go, huh. And what they're hearing is, wah, 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 wah. Okay, good. Don't teach geology. No one has ever walked into a wine shop and said, do you have any wines from calcareous soils? No one has ever done that. No one will ever do that. Stop talking about dirt. It's not interesting. We don't want botany lessons, clones, rootstocks, trellising systems. We're not gardeners here. This is supposed to be a beverage of joy, and you're talking about trellising. And worst of all, do not talk about enology. Wine is the most romantic beverage in the world. And if you think that romance has to do with cold soaks and indigenous yeasts, you are a very strange person. I know green is big in Europe. As I said, in the States, it's attractive, particularly for young people, but it's not actually a serious incentive. It is more a slightly added value than a serious incentive. So what do consumers want? They want to buy a wine that makes them fall in love. They want a story. 40% of Americans own passports. That's a terrifying idea right there, isn't it? Yeah? We need to give them the same way that Starbucks gives them the opportunity to explore the world with coffee. We need to do the same with wine. When you open that bottle, you're not drinking a beverage. You're taking a voyage to a beautiful place. I worked with Seagram years ago to launch the first brand ever sold exclusively on the internet. And it had a website And if you clicked on the website, it said, would you like more information? It was for a Malbec from Argentina. And when you clicked on the website, you did not get a fact sheet on the wine. You did not get an explanation of how the wine was made or where it came from. What you got was the unforgettable voice of Carlos Gardel singing a tango of his broken heart. The screen went black, and Carlos Gardel's voice came out to you singing of love. And people remember that. That's memorable. 42% of Americans own passports. We don't have to go to Italy because there's a very good Italian restaurant in my country. No? We don't have to go to France. I saw The French Kiss at the movies. And we don't have to go to Argentina because I can buy Malbec. That's what we need to be selling. They buy their wines to take a journey to another place and another time. So how can you be memorable? Understand your market and tell them what they want to know. Who made the wine? And not how, but why. Every winemaker will tell you how he makes the wine. I want to know, why do you make this wine? I want to know your dream. A friend of mine, Denis Dubourdieu, was, until he passed away recently, the professor of enology at the University of Bordeaux. Wonderful man. His students hated him because they would come to him and they would say, Professor Dubourdieu, here is my wine. Tell me how to make it better. And he would say, I can't. And they would say, but you're the professor. And he would say, yes, but it's your wine. You're the one who has to decide how to make it better. Now, if you can tell me how you want the wine to be better, I can tell you how to get there. But you have to have this vision in your mind. When your winemaker talks to consumers, don't talk about barrels and tanks. Talk about what I want to do with this wine, is create something and let that winemaker, if he's passionate, if she's passionate, explain that. Tell us benefits, not features. Water is a liquid that separates nations. Wine is a liquid that brings people together. With champagne, we know, if you have a celebration, that's what champagne is for. Tell us about wine the same way. Create an emotion, and most importantly, stop talking to their heads and talk to their hearts. So, communicate to the consumer. Give them the opportunity to be more than just consumers. You want to make them part of your family. You want them to become not customers, but missionaries. You want them to like your wine so much that they take it to their friend's house and say, you're not gonna believe this wine. That's your goal. Not, this was made with Malbec. That's not exciting. Tell us how, and we get bored. Tell us why, and you invite us to join you on the quest. This is the secret to every Pixar movie. It's not they don't tell you how, they tell you why. You have to find Nemo, and everyone wants to join in the party. So as I said, don't tell us you're passionate. Tell us what you love. So, would you like to know more about her? Anyone know who she is? No? No? Okay. Well, if she were a wine, here's what we would say. Kind of a problem, huh? Because it turns out that's not what we want to know. We want to know what makes her laugh. What does she do in her free time? Why is she wearing a bathing suit? Her name is Natalie Coughlin, And 12 years ago, she won more swimming medals than any woman had ever won in the Olympics. She likes wine. She has a small winery in Napa. In her free time, she teaches disadvantaged children how to swim because she thinks that no child should be afraid of the water. That's what we want to know. We want to know what kind of movies she likes. We do not need to know that she is 61% oxygen. By the way, I presented this once at Vin Italy, and I had an Italian winemaker attempt, in all seriousness, to convince me that the 0.9% trace elements are, in fact, what makes each one of us an individually unique person. So I'm going to give you a goal for marketing to the US market and maybe the world. It's to create a human connection between the brand and the consumer. It cannot be done with facts and figures. Here is something that most women in the group will understand and most men will struggle with. The goal is not to impress your consumers, the goal is to seduce them. One of my favorite cartoons from The New Yorker shows two attractive young people having dinner, and the young man is saying, "But enough of me talking about me. What do you think of me?" This is the way wineries talk to consumers. Instead, we should be seducing them. And the easiest way to seduce someone is not, I know this is going to be a big surprise to many men, it's not to talk. It's to listen. Wine is not about facts. People don't remember facts. They remember stories. And in fact, I have a dear friend in New York who says, facts tell, stories sell. So your job in the wine business, certainly in the American market and perhaps in the rest of the world, is not to intellectually convince us that your wine is good, but to romantically seduce us, to get us to fall in love with your wine. And I hope you're successful at it. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Paul, for this very profound ride through not only the wine market, also mentality of the Americans, which might appear sometimes a bit different to us.
Crazy.
It definitely is, I think. I learned a lot. I think all the people here did so as well.
Good.
But there's still some space for questions. Who wants to start? Impossible.
Anything. No questions.
No question. Okay, you have been talking a lot, I know, but some questions anyway. Are you so tired? Yeah, Paul. You told them everything.
I told them everything. That's right.
Thank you very much once again.
Thank you very much.